All right, it's draft season. Welcome to episode 41 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs at Sumer Sports. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff, the CEO of Sumer Sports, and the man who once drafted future Hall of Fame quarterback Matt Ryan. And that's important today because we are going to talk. We're not going to talk the Elijah Moore trade. We're not going to talk about Aaron Rodgers again. We're not going to talk about what the heck's going on with DeAndre Hopkins. We are going to go nuts and bolts today on the draft. We are going to talk about the quarterbacks that are available, the ones that everybody is mocking to the first round. Thomas, how you doing?
I'm good. I mean, it's been a wild, flinging day, so to speak. And I'm sitting here and I've been talked about a number of times. Every Zoom call I get on, they're like, dude, seriously, plaid shirt with Birch in the background, is that all designed? And I actually absolutely said no. I just got up this morning. It's been like my head down since I've got to work. So I'm ready to roll.
Which by the way, I think people should recognize, like, kind of how, it's weird, right? Because I think we need to appreciate your dedication here because, everybody looks at me like, look, I do my hair. I dress okay. I'm presentable. I'm trying to grow this beard out a little bit. But you, Thomas, you don't do things haphazardly. Like, you are obviously very well dressed. You have great hair, all that stuff. And yet today, because we had such a busy day at Sumer Sports, both Sumer Sports South, Palm Beach, Sumer Sports North, in Atlanta, and also Sumer Sports Ragtag here in Cincinnati. Because we were so busy today, you somehow had the backdrop and matched by chance alone, which is of course awesome. It has been a busy day. It's funny because we're in meetings talking about things like draft trades or player trades, and then of course the Jets go and trade Elijah Moore, which Adam Vonderhaar, one of our very sharp data scientists, formerly of Ole Miss, so I guess you're always Ole Miss if you're once Ole Miss. One of his favorite players goes and gets traded to your former team, the Cleveland Browns. But we're going to talk about quarterbacks today because I think there's a lot to offer here. I think when you look at obviously your background, formerly of a scouting, still always kind of a scout at heart, and then myself as an analytics person, I've said on this show that I think analytics, when it comes to football, have the least to offer when it comes to quarterback relative to any other position. So I come humbly to this discussion as we talk about the four guys here. We're going to start with CJ Stroud. By the way, Thomas, it can sometimes get lost here, but CJ Stroud is currently, depending upon the sportsbook you look at, about minus 165 to be the first overall pick. Minus 165 for those who are scoring at home is a 62.2 break-even percentage to be the first overall pick, meaning if you want to make that bet, you need to think he's a 63% or better chance to be the first overall pick. That has gone down since the Panthers traded for that first pick. He got all the way up to minus 400, which is an 80% break-even probability. So early on, people thought when they made that trade that they made it for CJ Stroud. Over time, there has been money on the other guys, right? So Bryce Young currently is plus 165. Plus 165, if you're scoring at home, you need a 37.7% chance to bet that. Followed by Anthony Richardson, who is 9-2 to be the first overall pick, and then Will Levis is 40-1. Those are the four guys we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk about them in that order. We're going to start with CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud, Ohio State Buckeyes. And by the way, William James, one of our loyal listeners, minus 150 on FanDuel. So even better, if you want to go ahead and make that bet, that's a 60% break even. If you want to, CJ Stroud, second in college football last year in yards per pass attempt, 9.4 per my former employer at PFF, 16 turnover-worthy plays, which is actually in the bottom third of college football. He had an average depth of target of 10.7 yards, adjusted completion percentage about 73. His pressure to sack ratio, which is an important variable we're going to talk about here, 14.1%, which is 41st in college football. And he had roughly 2.9 second time to throw. which was among, top fourth in college football in terms of time to throw in the pocket. So that's kind of the profile when you look at CJ Stroud coming out of Ohio State. We've had a few quarterbacks come out of Ohio State of late, obviously. Dwayne Haskins was one. That of course didn't work out. And the jury is still out on Justin Fields, who currently plays for the Bears, and is the reason why the Panthers are picking here and not the Bears. So, Thomas, when you watch CJ Stroud, from a evaluator's perspective, what came to your mind?
Well, I mean, I watched him throughout the season, of course, and honing in a little bit more, of course, video related and video study wise. Let me just start by saying, to me, his presence has always been something that has caught my attention. Just look, my background, I love athletic people, I love athletic quarterbacks as well. It's not normally my way to think we're going to be looking at a 5'10" quarterback and snapping him off the board at the first overall pick, if that's in fact what happens, with a guy like Young. We'll talk about him, of course, in a moment. When I watch CJ, and I know there was a lot of banter out there and a lot of people at Ohio State and the fan base throwing darts at him because of his lack of running ability, or at least his lack of running. I think it's more that, not the ability. I think this guy's got this really complete package to him that's what struck me, right? I think he has ability to stand tall in the pocket. I think he's got a nice awareness in the pocket. He's got a fluidity and a smoothness about him. I think the way that he delivers, his mechanics, I am all on board with that. I do like his ability to move and adjust. That's a big thing for me, right? I mentioned before with Matt Ryan, his ability to step up, or the struggle to step up when there's pressure in his face, is something that was a concern of mine through all of those years in Atlanta. We had to protect that way. I think it's the same way with a lot of quarterbacks out there. I like CJ Stroud's ability. Now it's a little bit different, right? We always project in college to the NFL. Very different when those guys are in your face, obviously, in the NFL. So I'm still trying to get my feel there, but it feels like he has the awareness and the ability to move around in the pocket appropriately and get rid of the ball at a what is he? He's 2.92 seconds, you said?
Yeah.
Under 3, we like that. So I like that ability. And again, I think this is a guy that you can grow with. And I want to continue to talk about this. I don't want to just spew everything out at the beginning of this. I want you to pepper me with questions. I like the guy. I like what he offers. I think the upside is there. I think teams are going to be very interested. Look, whether he goes first, second, or third will be really interesting. I guess not third, right? We're talking maybe fourth.
Well, I think that if he were to fall to 3 for some reason, I think a team's trading with Arizona. Like, I think that's fairly plain. Probably. But yeah, to your point, like he would not go to the Cardinals for sure. It's you said upside, which I think is really interesting, because I think everybody in this draft cycle that I've heard try to evaluate players pins Stroud as more of like a finished product than the other guys. And I see that in certain ways. I see that in, he's definitive. You watch that Georgia game and, you watch the Georgia game, and those are some NFL ball players, and he's moving in the pocket in ways he's moving with his eyes downfield. He's doing a lot of NFL things. And Thomas, can you just give me a little bit of an idea of like, how as a scout do you watch those things and say, okay, that's a polished attribute for a player, and not immediately go to this idea that, okay, he has a limited ceiling? Because when I think about, like, the last time we had a lot of quarterbacks in a draft, we had, Lawrence, Wilson, Lance, Fields, and then we had Mac Jones. And I think a lot of people looked at Mac Jones and said, boy, that's a guy who can kind of step into an offense right away and do some things. Limited ceiling, though. And I think that's more or less right. But those aren't always the case, right? A guy can come out of college incredibly polished and still have a high ceiling. You think about a guy like Andrew Luck or somebody like that. So when you're scouting and you see some polish, how do you then kind of divorce yourself from then saying, but yeah, he can still have upside? How do you still project his upside when he's answered some of the crucial questions that need to be answered about whether the guy can play quarterback in the NFL?
So I find this interesting from your perspective here, because someone is polished. You're saying maybe in the analytic world, or at least what you've read, that there's limited upside because he's already where he is. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think a lot of people believe that, right? So it's one of the reasons why, age is such an important variable in models, because people believe that, as you get older, you're kind of taking some tools out of the toolbox, right? And you're already kind of using things. And so when you get in the NFL and they're bigger, faster, stronger, if you've already used a lot of the tools of the trade, then where can you draw to get better? And that's why people always love, and we're going to talk about Anthony Richardson, a guy who is trying to get by without any real NFL caliber, attributes yet, because then they feel like, well, once we can apply those, then the sky's the limit. If you're a guy like Stroud and you're saying, well, he's accurate in the pocket, he doesn't, like 14.1 sack to pressure is not that bad. It's not great, but you're already doing a lot of things that NFL quarterbacks do. Is there that much juice left to squeeze out of the orange? I think that's what a lot of people believe. And I think it's false. I think if a guy shows that kind of poise and stuff in the college game, he can still process things faster. He can still, be more physical. Like we talked about this on the show, like he can avoid injuries better. Like we talk about how Brady avoided injuries for so long. It's because he can use half his brain, that he is like where everything's on autopilot because he's so good at the game. He can use half of his brain to take hits better and avoid injuries. Like there's so many more ways to improve. And I think that with Stroud, a lot of people see him being polished and say that's a low ceiling quarterback.
So I would say I've been around a situation in New England with Tom Brady in those early years where there was, of course, upside. He came in with an element of polish. Obviously didn't play as much, and et cetera, et cetera. I can use Matt Ryan as another example of a guy who had a lot together. I don't look at guys who have polish and who are accomplished in all areas as having limited upside. I've never looked at it that way. I get the concept. For me, it's you bring him in a situation where you're not spending your world's time trying to develop A, B, C, X, Y, and Z within his game, so he's able to develop even quicker in the National Football League. That's something, and again, we can go on and on about this, but that is something that has been on my mind as I've evaluated football players, quarterbacks especially throughout my career, is when you see a guy down there, and maybe it is Anthony Richardson, where people are saying he's got so much to build on, there's so much upside, but what truly is that? Okay, because of athleticism, because of strength, and he had one of the best. I think what was his? You had quoted here in some of your data.
Yeah, I mean, yards per attempt. I mean, he was one of the most productive players in all of college football.
Right.
He was 29th in ADOT, which again, you're going down the football field. Down the field. Like when you looked at him from an arm strength perspective, Thomas, like there's no problems there, right? Like he can make all the throws, which is important as well. Like we had a really good question here from Simon Shee, who said, how do you quantify and measure polished in an analytical sense?
Good question.
It shouldn't be based on a production or projection, right? I mean, when I look at polish, and this is something. Yeah, I'm gonna say something negative about him more to talk about his polish. So, when Stroud was clean, meaning like there was no pressure on him, he averaged 10.3 yards per pass attempt, which was twice as much as when he was pressured, 5.7. Meaning like when I think of that as kind of like this is a guy when all the business was taken care of. He's an assassin, right? He's an assassin. Mm-hmm. He's got that stuff down, and pressures is something that's hard because it comes in all shapes and sizes. So when you look at quarterback production when pressured, it can often be noisy because pressure can come as a product of four-man, pressure, and then you've got good coverage behind you. That's bad. Or it can come because of a blitz. And oftentimes, if you can beat that pressure, you're going to win because your guy's got one-on-one coverage or whatever. It can come or pressure, like if it's a guy like Mahomes who can escape, then the defense is screwed. And so when I look at more polished kind of quarterback play, I more mean like when the table is set for this quarterback, what kind of guy is he? And when I look at Stroud, when the table is set for him, that means clean pocket. He's completing balls. He's uber productive, and there isn't a Anthony Richardson overshoots the guy by 5 yards element to his game. Like, you don't want that, right? If you're an offensive coordinator, you're a general manager, a team builder, and you say, I'm going to go out and spend $40 million on my offensive line just for the guy to airmail receivers when you protect him. You know, you don't want that, right? And so when I think of Stroud, I think this is a guy for which that won't happen. That's going to be a guy that if you could set the table for him, good things are going to happen in the NFL.
Now, before we move on, do you think his ability to move, even though there were some complaints about it, do you think that factors in well with his versatility? Because it's a versatility for a quarterback in today's game. I mentioned this before. Loved Matt Ryan, but towards the end of my career there, I started thinking, wow, how would it be to get that athletic quarterback? And today we've seen some really big, tall quarterbacks who are still very athletic, of course, which is an interesting thing. When you talk about movement, athleticism, ability to run, ability to escape, like CJ Stroud might have, I don't know where you gauge him on that. Do you think that adds to polish as a quarterback?
Yeah, there's a phrase called absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence, right? So like, there's a part where, when you think about his 2 tackles when he was at Ohio State, had like the 2 biggest wingspans in the entire country. The wide receivers that he has, when he was last year, he had Jackson Smith-Njigba, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, who was the NFL's Rookie of the Year. Then this year, it's Marvin Harrison Jr. He has great players. And so at part of me is going to think, okay, well, if you take away those great players, what happens? Like, that's, I think, a legitimate question about CJ Stroud because you don't have that. But on the other side, it creates the absence of necessity for him. I personally, when I watch him, I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to run the read option and keep it. Like, I don't think he's going to be a guy like that. But I also don't think he's going to kill you because he can't avoid a rush. Like, it's very clear that he can move around in the pocket. And because his offensive line was so stout at Ohio State at times, he didn't have to. And so to me, it's more of like I'm going to leave open the idea that he's more than athletic enough to be an NFL quarterback and be a good one.
Look, he's going to be, we know he's going in the top 3 or whatever. Okay. So my feeling is I'm not that worried about not having the right people around him. I think a guy like this who shows as he does, back to your polish comment, back to the ability to have versatility, back to standing tall, back to being a smart guy and having a presence about him. Of course, leadership is very important. I think these are the kind of things that make those top 3 teams say, look, if I don't get who I want, and maybe that's someone out there who truly wants Young to be their quarterback, then we're going to be good here, right? Before we move on, I think it's really important when you're sitting there and you start deciding, man, I am pulling someone off the board that is going to be the tone setter for our organization, hopefully for the next few years. Or as a general manager, I'm pissing down my leg and there's going to be a lot of darts thrown my way. That's the way it is, right? There's a lot of pressure in this situation. We know it at so many levels. When you have someone like this who has so much to offer out the gate, even though it may not be the sort of ostensible upside that some people are thinking with some of the other players, whether it's Anthony Richardson or not, it is a good settling feeling as a general manager, knowing you're coming in with this. You compare this to what they did with San Francisco a few years ago, right? How many years ago has it been?
Since 2 years ago, 2021.
I mean, think about how uneasy a pulling off the board that was. This has an element, not of ease, but an element of we've done our work and we feel comfortable. We're going to grow. There's nothing kind of off the cuff. We're not taking a chance. We're pulling this together and we think that we can build with this guy. And personally, I think there is upside here.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it feels safe. For Stroud, for better or worse, it feels safe, which if you think about Frank Reich, after years of sort of the issues with, Yeah, obviously Andrew Luck's retirement, then Brissett, then Rivers, then Wentz and Ryan. You maybe want to take less of a gamble, and maybe Stroud ends up being that player. Now, the other guy that they're thinking of, as we talk about the markets, about plus 165, if I'm looking at Bet Online, for the first overall pick, this is Bryce Young. These numbers have gone down. There has evidently been money that has come in on Bryce Young to be the first overall pick. Young is a former Heisman Trophy winner himself. He has an 8.8 yards per pass attempt, which is 12th in college football last year out of 155. He only had 9 turnover-worthy plays, which is 40th. 10.0 average depth of target, which is in the top third of college football. 77.4 adjusted completion percentage, which is 13th. That's for PFF. 12.5 pressure to sack, which is 35th. That's a really good number there. And then 3.2 seconds time to throw, which is 12th longest in college football. Young comes with one question mark, right? If Bryce Young's 6'3", 230, Thomas, like, there's no question of who's being picked first, right? Because Young comes from a better program, slightly. Ohio State's a great program, and he's had more production. He's played in bigger games. He played in a title game last year. Although honestly, both Stroud and Young have taken Georgia down to the wire in a college football playoff game the last 2 years. Young, very athletic, does a lot with his legs, is very good on the move, but it's 5'10", and had to probably put one of those weights in his pants to weigh 207 at the combine, right? So what do you think about this one, Thomas?
It's not easy. I mean, it's not easy, but none of the big quarterbacks that have been taken who were shorter are that easy to take again in the role as a general manager and a head coach, right? You have to convince your owner that of course this is right, and who cares what the height is, but it is a concern. And you're projecting, of course. I mean, when you watch him, and I happen to be watching earlier on today, when you watch him, his ability to, again, we were talking about moving in the pocket, which is a big deal in today's world. Step up, move to the right, move to the left, have the vision that he has, the ability to quickly get rid of the ball when he needs to at all angles and levels, almost falling away, sometimes probably more than I'd like to see, right? Times I see him falling away kind of off balance a little bit, but completing a hell of a lot of passes that you might think he wouldn't. So I look at that and I daydream again about having a smaller, more athletic quarterback like this in today's world. I would be much more apt to think about this in today's world than back in 2008, right? I was so gung-ho, just to shed a little bit of light, my first quarterback ever, first pick ever as a general manager, I was going to get prototypical. I was going to get tall, stand in the pocket, tough enough, deal with it, enough movement, like adequate movement, which we all know Matt was never lauded for that movement. That was big for me. In today's world, I would be much more apt to look down this laneway, to be honest with you now. That said, like anyone, that's a big choice for you. You're hanging everything on someone who has some limitations, of course, and then the height, like you said. There's going to be balls knocked down in the NFL. We have a different situation set up when the players are, obviously the defenders are coming upfield, right? Not obviously he's played against fantastic talent. So I am, of course, concerned, and yet he's one of the smaller guys or shorter guys over the years that I've been less concerned about. But maybe that's just more my traditional side of potentially being around quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think that there are instruments that teams can use to avoid some of the problems that small quarterbacks have. I mean, I do get a little concerned that Bryce Young threw almost as many passes last season that were over 20 yards down the middle of the field, 70, than he threw in the 10 to 19 range, 77. Part of that, I think, is the talent around him. Like, if you're playing for Alabama, you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you let that thing go over the middle. But like, we've seen this with Russell Wilson, right? We've seen this, at times with Baker Mayfield, another shorter quarterback. We've seen this at times. If you look, I think Kyler Murray's had a pretty good career so far. you know, he's probably not worth 46 million now, but he had a good career. But you look at the passing patterns, and it's like you have to be able to get a basket every once in a while over the middle of the field. And when you are that height, it's just difficult. Like, you can scheme those things up through play action, and somebody was talking about RPOs in the chat. Like, you can do all those things, but when it's 3rd and 7 and you got to drop back to pass, you got to, like, you don't want to necessarily have to scheme pockets such that your quarterback can see the middle of the field because you helped him. It's better that he just sees over the line of scrimmage. Now, again, to your point, like, his movement. And here's a cool stat that I pulled up. You know, he averaged more yards per attempt last year, 9.3 when pressured, than he did when clean. And he had but you know, he had just one turnover worthy play when clean. I also like his statistics when you break them up are very good, right? Like, when he's pressured, he has movement that he can avoid, you know, that kind of stuff. The one I worry about, and this is just like my long-standing love of the game, when I look at slender quarterbacks, I look at, you know, obviously Murray's been injured a lot, and that has hurt the Cardinals. Mayfield was injured, and like Mayfield was on his way to being okay. I thought he had the Chiefs on the ropes in the playoffs, and you know, and then he got injured in 2021, and he was terrible. And you know, all the way back to like Jim McMahon, a Super Bowl winning quarterback, a winner, an absolute guy that, you know, set all the records at BYU, right? We talk about Lavelle Edwards, we talk about Paul Saban's, you know, godfather of football. And when he got to the pros, he just got beat up too much, right? And he still was effective, but he'd start 12 games a year. And like, even all the way to Teddy Bridgewater, a guy who was, again, a 32nd overall pick, was on his way to being pretty good, and has just been dealt with injuries because he's a smaller guy. So, you know, if you buy into Bryce Young as your quarterback, Thomas, it comes with some assumptions, right? We talk about our product, assumptions. The assumptions have to be that you got to protect the guy, right? And if you spend a lot on your offensive line with Bryce Young, Thomas, like, it has to come at the expense of your defense or your wide receivers. And do you think that that's a gamble worth making, given all the positives we've talked about so far?
I do. And I just got kicked off, and I'm sorry, I'm back off. Can you repeat the back end of that question?
Yeah. So no worries. Basically, if you have Bryce Young, you are going to have to invest in the offensive line. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts around. Like, you cannot do what the Cardinals did, frankly, and you know, and kind of assume that his movement skills will make up for it. You have to create the wall around him. And that's going to come at the expense of wide receivers or defense. Is that a gamble you're willing to make with a guy who's being picked 1-1?
It is a gamble. I mean, again, all these things you would wish that you weren't having to worry about any of this. And you would wish that you had a complete open slate and creativity to run any offense that you wanted. The reality is that's not necessarily the case, right? So with an investment like this, it takes a lot. There's a lot involved with this. And you can reap the benefits of having someone who has the awareness and the movement in the pocket. Again, I keep bringing this up. Those latter years of being around, not being able to have that upper echelon ability to adapt when it becomes second and third, mainly third down and 3rd and 7, 9, whatever it is. My God, that is a really good feeling, knowing that you can, you know, tuck the ball and run or adjust and make plays outside of, you know, the general interior of the pocket. That is a really important thing. So, you know, again, the more that I think about the size, which is a concern, I love so much more about this player. And of course, this is going to be what's going to be difficult. Here's Carolina. They have to make a very, very big decision on this. This is not easy for Scott Fitter and Frank Reich, you know, when you're thinking about it, right? More Scott, right? Scott's in a situation. He's been there for a while where they have to make a decision on a quarterback, potentially. This could be one that they're considering. And, you know, there's a lot on his plate, of course, to make this big time decision.
Yeah, for sure. And with both Young and Stroud, those guys are going to start probably from day one. And so that adds a level of complexity to it, because their warts, and they're going to be able to work through them, but their warts are going to be there from day one, much like Matt's were. You know, and Matt threw a touchdown, 75 yards his first play, like, you know, but he was good from the beginning, but you work through that. some guys, which I think this next guy is going to be Anthony Richardson from Florida, some guys have sit him on the bench for a while, written all over him, right? And so Richardson of Florida last year, 7.7 yards per attempt, which is 57th in college football out of 155. 13 turnover-worthy plays, which is 83rd. 11.5 average depth of target, which is 14th, so a deeper guy. 64.1 adjusted completion percentage, which again is what you would get if you counted drops as completions and batted balls as not pass attempts. That was 141 out of 155, right? So that's down there quite a bit. One positive in his data, by the way, 9.2 pressure to sack. That's better than Patrick Mahomes was out of Texas Tech. And that was 12th best in college football last year. 3.18 seconds time to throw. That was the 6th longest in college football last year. So his data says he's running around the pocket a long time, and his passes are deep, and they're not often accurate. That's what the data says. What does your eye say, Thomas?
So my eye says, of course, everything that we know, right? Fantastic athlete. I mean, I will tell you that many months ago when I was watching, I'm like, this guy will be an interesting mid first rounder, to a team that can spend a little bit of time developing him. Of course, there are shortcomings right now, whether it's decision-making, whether it's, true accuracy at times, completion rate. I mean, believe me, these are all things that are on my mind. And I think this is the guy where we talk about the upside, right? There is upside there. Can you reach the upside as a general manager? That's a tough, you're in a tough spot there, right? What determines whether you reach, what determines whether Anthony Richardson reaches his upside? Is it the scheme you're playing with him? Is it the coach you have at the helm? Is it his coordinator? Is it all of that, right? Because that is important when you're talking about, reaching top. What is best for this guy right now? Is it to sit on the sideline, and grow at Seattle? I mean, does he get to Seattle by chance?
Yeah. Or Detroit behind Jared Goff.
Or Detroit behind Jared Goff, yes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a good question because, everybody, and this is where it's so important, Thomas, and maybe you can shed some light on this because I don't think that people really appreciate how difficult it is to scout and not to draw from your past experiences too much. Because, we all look at Mahomes and we all think about, oh my God, Mahomes came in and Mahomes was much better than Anthony Richardson his final year, but he was very similar to Anthony Richardson in his first year. The issue is that we're not getting the next 2 years of Anthony Richardson. He's coming out after what would have been Mahomes' first year as a starter. So, he doesn't get to develop in college the same way that a guy like Mahomes did. But everybody's looking at the playoffs in the AFC and saying, okay, Patrick Mahomes, that's a world-class talent. Josh Allen, that's a world-class talent. Joe Burrow is a little bit more like CJ Stroud, but again, very, very good quarterback. And not a rocket arm, but like a world-class, probably second best quarterback in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Herbert's a robo quarterback. Again, that's what Anthony Richardson promises, right? Trevor Lawrence, generational guy. That's what Anthony Richardson, that's what everybody looks at that AFC group and says, if I'm not getting a guy who has that kind of athletic ability and arm strength, what am I doing here? I'm just messing around, right? And so the problem with that, of course, is that you're going to look at Anthony Richardson, you're going to want that. And desperation, as you've talked about numerous times on this show, need almost always predates mistakes. And so if you're sitting here and you're the Detroit Lions and Jared Goff has gotten you to 9 wins, but limited, right? A very limited guy, as you said. Geno Smith, if you're Seattle, that got you to 9 wins, but very limited, right? Good guy, good quarterback, limited. If you're one of these teams that has one of those good but limited quarterbacks, and you look at the teams that are winning in the AFC and you're saying, God, I got to get myself a robo quarterback. Well, Anthony Richardson is the availability bias, right? And he's right there. How do you, when you are doing this, because we had this happen with Malik Willis last year in the minds of a lot of the intelligentsia, Thomas, right? A lot of people said Malik Willis has the athletic ability, the arm strength, blah, blah, blah. And the whole league was apparently much sharper on this than a lot of the public people talk about the draft because he landed in the third round as opposed to being taken in the first round, as many people predicted. How do you try to avoid that bias in your brain of trying to chase the possible, as opposed to like evaluating the situation as is?
It's not easy. And remember, it's not just you as, of course, the general manager. You have your scouting staff and you have your coaching staff around you, right? And we're always discussing that as you're building up, right? So and the biases that you have, to your point, it's just plain and simple not easy. I sit there and I start thinking about, if you're referring to the biases, you're talking about size, athleticism, right? Maybe doesn't have everything together right now. And then are you suggesting that in time, that will all come together with the proper coaching? I mean, let's talk about that for a minute, because I do want to chat. When you talk about biases, does Ran Carthon, let's use him as an example, right? At Tennessee, he just gets that GM job. He's got a quarterback situation that he needs to really hone in on. Is this a good situation for them? Not only because he's got his background with Florida, of course, right? Does he have biases that he has to deal with? And is it beneficial for that team to take it all in and work with this guy and continue to grow with a guy like Anthony Richardson at Tennessee? I want to bring that back around to you for a minute.
Yeah, right. Because if you're the Niners, you think about your path, right? Your path has been like that Niners regime. So Kwesi, Ran Carthon, all of them. It's Jimmy G and all of Jimmy G's limitations, right? And you bump up against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. You bump up against the Rams in the NFC title game. You bump up against the Eagles in the NFC title game. You already went and said, we need one of these truly elite quarterbacks. And this gets back to the whole, like, not every one of them should sit, but you go get a truly elite athlete in Trey Lance out of North Dakota State.
Right.
And if it wasn't for injuries, maybe, like, I think that could be part of his thought process. Because you think about Tennessee and where, and maybe this is a good thing to ask you, because you talk about Tennessee. When you got to Atlanta, obviously the folks there before you failed for reasons that were partially their fault and then partially the Michael Vick thing and all this stuff. But, like, if you're Ran Carthon, how much of a post-mortem do you do on the previous regime? Because if I'm looking at Tennessee, I say, we had a generational running back. We have a great coach. We have good players, a lot of injuries, and the quarterback was very good for a short amount of time. You took away the offensive coordinator and he became kind of average, kind of the guy we all thought he was, Ryan Tannehill, right? Mm-hmm. And so very Jimmy G-like, right? I think if you put Jimmy G in the same situation as Tannehill, you get similar results. So the Niners very clearly saw Jimmy G and wanted a better athlete, wanted more upside. Ran Carthon, is he applying that same principle to Tennessee? And are they, I mean, it sort of feels like the kind of the same situation where you could play Tannehill for a year and then play Richardson later on. Tannehill seems like a great guy, seems like a very similar guy to Jimmy G, would play along with that. Is that kind of, I mean, I guess there's a lot of questions wrapped into that, but, like, is that the thought process there?
Well, I think it could be. I mean, here's Ran thinking he would love a movement type quarterback. He would daydream more than likely the fact that he has seen, as he's done his postmortem, as you refer to it as, he has seen the pedestrian side of what's going on with that offense there and Tannehill and the limited upside. As solid as he has been, solid is not going to win them Super Bowls, and they know that.
Right.
And to daydream again, I remember daydreaming. When you're going in as a general manager and it's your first time picking off the board and literally in charge of it, you, of course, want to hit a home run, right? And you want to bring a guy like this in, even if he's not ready out the gate, that you're able to build with, and that's what you're going to be hanging on to. And you're going to be talking with your owner consistently about the growth of a guy like Anthony Richardson while you still have a quarterback that can get you 9+ wins, right? That's what we know. So there is a settling element. This sounds really odd for other teams. It would be man, a shot in the dark, right? Or maybe that's the wrong line, but it would be a lot more haphazard in their mind about bringing in Anthony Richardson, right? I think someone like Rand and some of the teams like that, I think the same thing with Seattle. Just knowing that you have someone, leading the charge and you're going to win games, you're going to keep the fan base happy. No one wants to hear about this. You're going to keep mainly the owner happy. You're going to keep your morale up. That is a great feeling to know. How long you can do that for, Eric? Is that 1 or 2 years? Maybe. I don't think that someone like Rand Carthon at Tennessee believes he has 3 and 4 years to keep someone on the bench. Far from that. He's hoping.
Yeah, and that's where I think it always gets hard, because you even think about Jordan Love in Green Bay and you're thinking a lot of similar ideas, very good arm, very solid athleticism, project, not the greatest statistics in college. And Aaron Rodgers, being that guy who can kind of keep him on the bench for a while, but that caused consternation. And in fact, a lot of the issues that the Packers are dealing with is the fact that they had to sort of pay back Aaron for the disrespect of drafting there's that contract that Aaron signed was sort of, it was in large part because they said, look, like, we made a mistake by misjudging you in 2020. And now we have to pay you back for that. And like, you're sort of making 2 errors with one. Like, I worry about those kind of things. It is tough. I think you have to be okay with taking it. Like, if you're the Lions, let's say, you got to be okay taking Anthony Richardson 6th. And if he never develops, never playing him. And that's okay. Like, I personally think that has to be part of it. And Jared Goff has to be a guy who, Jared Goff has to be a guy you roll with if he plays really well, right? And that's not a reality in today's NFL, but I wish it was, right? I think a lot of teams would make more sound decisions about QB. I think QBs would have a much better developmental cycle if that were the case. And I think it's true about this last guy we're going to talk about, Thomas, which is Will Levis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Will Levis, Kentucky quarterback, played in the SEC, had a much better year as his previous year's penultimate year than this last one. Mm-hmm. 8.4 yards per attempt. It's actually fairly decent. 13 turnover-worthy plays. That's 83rd in college football. 8.68 out, which is not that high. 101st. So he's a shorter thrower guy. Mm-hmm. People do laud his athleticism, as you're going to talk about, and his arm strength. Adjusted completion percentage was 31st, 75.6. Here's a couple what I would consider to be worrisome statistics. So 26.8% of his pressures turned into sacks. That was 137th in college football. He was one of the worst college football players when he was pressured at avoiding sacks. That's not a great statistic from college to pro. And he only took 2.58 time to throw, which means, like, he's not back there running around and getting sacked. He's kind of getting sacked early in the down, which, that's in my opinion, just as somebody who doesn't evaluate, I don't pretend to, but like that to me, if I'm looking at the statistics, is a guy who maybe early in the down is not processing things as well as he should be. Do those things come out when you watch Will Levis on film, Thomas?
They do come out, and it is a legit concern, no question about it. I know there's been talk out there about people are beating him up too much. He had injuries, et cetera, right? But the reality is, as an organization, you really, really have to drill down on that to figure out where that's coming from. Your comments there with what you just mentioned are, massively important to me, right? I love his presence, right? Just his movement and his ability. He's a strong guy, right? I've said this time and again. He's got a confidence level about him, right? He's going to take anyone on. I like that part. I think that's an important part of a quarterback in the National Football League. And yet, in the end, if you're worried about his accuracy, if you're worried about his decision-making, we know that you're not getting around that. And that is not getting better in the National Football League, right? So that's where my concerns are when I start really honing in on Will. Now, I want to watch more because I want to see where he was pressed in certain games that I didn't necessarily get to. When you start talking about, 2.58, what'd you say, 112th longest? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so he's one of the quicker throwers in college football.
Quicker throws. I love quick throwers, man. Right? I used to say to our offensive coordinator at Atlanta, when they put Matt in that spot, Matt was throwing beyond 3. It used to drive me bonkers. Right? What are we doing? To have someone like this get the ball off like you can, I like. But your reasoning there about how that is a concern for you is, again, it's eye-opening for sure.
Yeah, and there's one more piece of information on him that I think is a little concerning when I think about Will Levis, just like from there's a couple. When you look at him throwing outside the numbers, he was 3 of 8, only 3 of 8 from 10 to 19 yards throwing to the right outside the numbers, and he was only 2 of 4 throwing outside the numbers to the left between 10 and 19. And Tej Seth wrote about this at sumersports.com, by the way. A ton of great content at sumersports.com on our website, as well as Twitter. Find us there. Great, I think, article content. He was just 1 of 12 throwing outside the numbers over 20 yards last year. And I get worried, right? And deep ball accuracy is somewhat your wide receivers and somewhat the quarterback. But when you're talking to me, he only completed 4 passes over 10 yards outside the numbers to his on-ball hand side last year. I get a little worried. And then lastly, and this is I think where a lot of people are concerned. So from a clean pocket last year, he had 9 turnover-worthy plays, and he had just 4 when pressured. So that means like the majority of his mistakes happen when no one was pressuring him. Like those are free throws, right? Like no one's pressuring him. He's making the majority of his mistakes. I get worried about that because we talk about it. When the table's set for you, I need my quarterback to be automatic, right? I need him to knock down shots when the whole thing is sort of out in front of him that way. And with Levis, it was a little bit dicey there. And so I think a lot of that corroborates a lot of the concerns that people have. Mm-hmm. Now, there's, as you said, arm strength. He has that way about him. Like, I think a quarterback has to command a huddle. I think he's got to be a tough guy. I think he's got to be big and strong, all this stuff. But there's some real concerns about him from a production standpoint.
And when you start talking about building a team and you start talking about in the top 5 or 6 or wherever he might go, again, another difficult decision. And if you're pushed by this incredible need and you're thinking, what else are we going to do? I'm telling you, I know the conversations in the building. It's hair pulling for general managers and head coaches at times because they're what we do in the NFL is we beat the hell out of someone, right? We beat him down, and then, this sounds odd, we have to build them back up, right? So that we can justify drafting someone like this. Because believe me, there's been a lot of beating down on him. And so I just will be, it is the way of the world in the NFL, right? That idea of building him up enough to say to your owner after you've picked them and, maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever it is, that again, you're able to justify that. I don't want to beat that point up, but it happens all the time. And it is an unnerving situation when you're thinking, this is what's left, and we have to take this person because we need a quarterback. And I'm not just picking on Will, far from that. I think he's got a lot of good traits, but we're still concerned about what we just have already talked about. So you pull him off the board, on Thursday, and it's prime time, and you're trying to, raise the roof, and you're thinking in the back of your mind, we have a lot of work to do with this guy to make sure that we create the right situation for him to thrive, and hopefully that's thriving for a long time, or we're going to obviously be in a world of hurt.
William Jones had a great question. Levis had a great junior year and a poor senior year. What do we think of that from an analytics or evaluation perspective? We have had situations where guys have gotten worse as they progress. Justin Herbert's a positive example. Frankly, Brock Purdy's a positive example. He was much better first couple years when he was at Iowa State than his subsequent years, and was has had a good pro career so far for San Francisco. When I was at PFF, we did that analysis a little bit. It wasn't. There's so few quarterbacks that get taken, so there wasn't really a definitive answer, but that is something to consider. Like, the question is like, did the SEC figure him out? And then, or was there an injury? Like, I think a lot of times an injury will really, affect a player, and you have to, like, that's stuff that you have to do your due diligence on, frankly, Thomas, right? Like, and that's, you guys pay a lot of money for that. There's a question here from Ashley who says, are there variables you see in college that make it more likely these rookie quarterbacks will get big contracts after their rookie contract? Is that something you consider budgeting for in the future? I think your answer to this has almost always been no, Thomas, right? Like, you are drafting for, like, and we talked about this at work today. It's like you're drafting for the next two to 3 years, right? And, you sort of, it's a good problem to have. A lot of times these teams that have cap space, it's because they didn't draft well like 4 years ago. And it was often their predecessor didn't draft well. Think about Chicago.
Sure.
They didn't really draft because they had the Khalil Mack trade. But it does get to my one thing where you and I have had disagreements about Baker Mayfield, which is there's never a situation, right, where you draft a guy in the first round and you're thinking, I hope this guy's good for 4 years, but I don't think he's actually going to be worth the fifth year, the deal after 5 years, right? That's never crossing your mind, because if a guy, you're drafting that guy in the first round to be, you're trying to get him to be your franchise QB.
You're trying to get him to be your franchise QB. No question about it. Again, Eric, 30 plus years ago, 40 years ago, when you're a general manager, it's going to be the span, live the span of your career. And you can have that type of approach. In today's world, I just want everyone to know, we know this. I mean, you have to hit on it now. You have to. There's no one that's in those spots that don't believe they can't hit on it now. And they don't want to be faced with this situation again, where in 4 years they're going to have to go back into the quarterback market. I mean, again, a lot of the people that are long-standing people. I mean, you could take Kevin Colbert, right, at the Steelers, who retired last year. I mean, he had Ben for his entire career, basically, didn't I believe he did as a general manager. I mean, that's ideally what you want. I was very fortunate to have Matt through those 12 and a half years. That's a great feeling that you're planning and you hit on something like that. For you to take segmented approaches to having a quarterback, it's not one that you like. It's not one that your owner likes. It's not one that your marketing department likes. You really want to hone in on someone that's going to be there for the long haul. I don't mean to babble on that, brother, but it is.
I think you're being very practical. I think that, like, my stance is, you always should. Now that I've kind of been around it a little bit longer, I've seen sort of the fruits of it. Like, I think drafting a quarterback in the first round and him being like kind of a middle of the pack guy can win you a lot of games. You have to be prepared to move on from him, but you can still win with him. You think about, the Steelers last year won 9 games with Kenny Pickett. Like, that can happen because the league is designed for you to do well when you have a quarterback on a rookie deal. But I don't think you should ever have that be your goal. I don't think you should go into a draft and be like, this is a 4-year and burn guy, or turn and burn guy. Like, and so to answer Ashley's question, like, I think the models for whether or not a quarterback's going to work out are the same models as whether or not you're going to pay him a big money deal, because the way that the economy of quarterback contracts works is that if he's worthy of a contract, he's getting that top end deal, a la Murray, a la, all those, Daniel Jones makes $40 million, for God's sakes, right? Like, and if he doesn't, he doesn't. And that's ultimately how, the economies work. So,
but of course, Eric, we all know this. You do sometimes do that with other positions, right?
Oh, for sure. I think,
and I've had that.
I think a lot of times, for sure. Safeties, linebackers, defensive tackles, guards, centers. Like, I think tight ends, a lot of these non-premium positions, maybe not in the first round, but I think in subsequent rounds, you draft a guy to play 4 years on a surplus for you, and then you let him go. I mean, the Chiefs just let Juan Thornhill go, I think, and you listen to their reasoning. It's very, hey, he was a great 4-year player at this much. We're not going to pay him any more than that, and that's, again, the NFL draft affords you an instrument to play that way in a capped league. So, Thomas, this is fun. I know we've had a long day. We got through 55 minutes of talking ball, which I think is fun. I think the listeners really enjoyed it. We really appreciate all of you for coming to this podcast a little bit early today because Eric has to go to a choir concert in about 20 minutes. And really enjoyed talking about the quarterbacks. I think next Wednesday we'll talk running backs, which is always fun because there's running back position is kind of fun. I don't know. I know it's sacrilege to say that as an analytics guy, but we really appreciate you all for being here. Smash the like button if you enjoy what you listen to. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get alerts every time we go live. If you listen to us on the podcast stream, please subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform. May that be Apple, Spotify, whatever. Please leave a review as well. Hopefully 5 stars. But nonetheless, we love your feedback. We love being able to interact with you guys every single week. And as we continue to go through the draft, we hope to continue to provide great content for y'all. So for Thomas Dimitrov, this has been Eric Eager. This has been the Sumer Sports Show.